let's call the meeting start now, 12:08 p.m. Exemption Committee for the Environmental Advisory Council. Maybe we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. Michelle Lefebvre, Chair of Exemption.
Okay. Onana Thone, Exemption Committee member.
Don Higger, Exemption Committee member.
Tom Eisen, ERP staff. And there may be some other ERP staff listening in. Or maybe not.
For the notes, I think I just assume it's Kaylee, is that correct?
Probably Kim.
Kim.
And I guess, yeah, Onana, are you maybe technically a member of the public?
Oh, I guess, yeah, actually. Sorry, guys, I'm actually a member of the public. That's right. I can't vote on anything.
Just to be technical.
Thank you for that correction. I was all thinking this was my last meeting, but yeah, I mean, I'm already a member of the public. Thanks, Tom.
So just Dawn and I are the committee members.
Fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining as a member of the public now.
Sure.
So yes, right. Just to recap now that we're officially in the meeting. Yeah, we received ERP's list originally in April, or ERP did, and then committee received it in May. We had an internal discussion at the June meeting. Then we had a DOE attended our meeting in July, and then they've been revising the list since then and resubmitted it in early October. And as we were discussing, it's significantly revised. We're talking about the potential benefits of getting a red line version of the list, but I do see it so very different. We certainly can ask though.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful to track to make sure, one, that, you know, our prior suggestions were incorporated. Like, for example, I know we gave them feedback on page 3 of their original version, which I think is now page.
They did add advisory to the general note, and under I think it was exemption under one of the
first 2 pages. Yeah.
So I saw that, but they added part 3, which was to address emergency actions.
Yeah. Okay, that might explain the link. But I guess one note is that, you know, for example, where I started noticing the list change was on what's now page 5. We had asked them to include references to the night sky protection statute. They didn't do that for those references, and, you know, the lettering and numbering has changed. So I think, you know, it may just take a little bit longer to go through this list to review the new stuff that they added, and then to see if we, again, I didn't really see the size limits that we had previously talked about, like you mentioned, for some of these things, which I think we would still want to see if they're going to try to put it as a part 1, where some of this might more appropriately be part 2, like the stabilization measures, that type of stuff that we talk, slope stabilization, those kind of bigger things that could involve, you know, significant land movement or whatnot.
One that jumped out for me, where there was a size limit in part 2, but then not in part 1. I think it was under construction.
Are they adding anything significant in terms of structures from the last time? Because I think I may have missed a meeting, but I remember they're talking about swimming pools and all that stuff. So I'm just wondering.
You didn't miss. That was the last time we talked.
Oh, that was okay. And then is someone going to show up from DOE on this meeting?
They said that they would.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
Yeah, they said they would. But we can, since essentially we have a new list, we certainly can proceed with another internal discussion of what we have now. But to answer your question, are there many more?
Because because 8 pages to 23 is a lot.
It's a lot. And in some cases, there's a lot of things, there's some things listed as part 2 that I think could be part 1. And, you know, I just, so in a lot of cases, they've added a lot more specificity. It seemed like they went through their list of things that they do and really plugged in what they do into where they thought those things would fit.
I don't mind if it's comprehensive. I'd rather have comprehensive than none, you know?
Yeah.
Easier.
Certainly, it's a whole different look
Mhm.
at the list, I think, than what they did last time, which I think was more of a review, you know, a reboot of what they had before.
It's like they had their maintenance staff go through it and add stuff.
That's
Mhm.
kind of what it feels like, but
Yeah.
you know, I see
Like
under
bollards, painting, erosion control.
very detailed, and this could be, like you're saying, it could be very useful, you know, for the department, you know, when doing projects to have a very comprehensive list. But I wouldn't think you'd have to do a part 2 notice to repair a bike rack, which is something they have listed under part 2 type 1. You know,
That would,
Well,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
to me doesn't, I mean, that's just one small example. And I was like, same as you, and I was like, oh, I'll review this. But then I was like, oh man, there's a lot in here. I think that, you know, even stairs, lifts, elevators, ramps. I don't feel that needs to be a part 2 if you're just repairing or
Especially if it's internal repairs to that kind of
Right.
stuff, right? Yeah, that
Right.
doesn't really make sense to
even painting, curving
yeah.
gates. I mean, again, trying to make things easier for them.
Mhm.
You're just
Like
doing
is-
maintenance.
Is teacher workhouse unit like a housing unit? That seems quite big. Unless it's just like an apartment.
Where are you
Not-
looking?
Yeah,
Number
which one?
2, page 6, under general exemptions.
General exemption type 2 or
General exemptions type 2, 1 is alterations, 2 is
Yeah.
teacher workforce housing unit.
Yeah.
Is that like an
replacement
apartment?
Yeah, see, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, if it's a big building, that would probably be part 2 because you're talking about
Right.
replacement, reconstruction, right?
Or construction?
Yeah.
But furniture, no. Bike racks, no.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Hose bids, no.
But some of these appear under type 1 and type 2, like the bike racks.
Yeah.
One is also under part 1, type 1, and under part 2, type 1. So what's the threshold for it being a part 1 versus a part 2? I don't think it belongs in part 2 at all. You already have it in.
Maybe it's a new proposed project?
It's the same type, so it's under operations, repairs, or maintenance of existing structures.
yeah.
So same type.
Yeah.
A bigger bike rack. Under
Hey,
type.
you know, times have changed from 1960 to 1980.
No.
I mean, they don't even ride bikes anymore. They ride they ride e-bikes, I guess. And
Legs, yeah.
and what is that skateboard thing?
A hoverboard or
Yeah, like something like that. Like, you know, I don't
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't even know if it's safe to ride a bike.
right.
The bikes have big fat tires and maybe don't fit into the old school
Right?
racks that have kind of narrower slots.
You know the
for
ones
narrow tires.
the ones, Tom, downtown where it's like the shape of the bike and that's the bike lock.
Yeah,
And those things always irritated me because I was like, it's
they're
so
very
impractical.
dysfunctional,
I know.
very impractical. They're a little artistic, but that's about
Yeah.
it.
Whoever thought that up was anyway.
I did look, just pulled up the 2006. That was the last DOE list,
Mhm.
and the one we received back in May is definitely a lot like that list.
The
So
old
I think-
rack. Okay.
yeah, like the old list. So I think they at first just tried to, you know, modify it just a little bit, and then I think after our discussion, they thought about it a lot and then revised it a lot. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's at a point where, I mean, unless they want us to do it, I mean, and maybe whoever's working on it needs to just take a better look, but a lot of this still should be reorganized part one, part two.
Do we do that? Do
Huh?
we actually, can we reorganize for them, or is that?
Well, we can point out line by
we can-
line, we can go,
Yeah.
this one we think should be part two, this
Yeah.
one we think should be part two, or we can give a general, and we can do
Yeah.
that by email.
Maybe that should be our next INO meeting.
Yeah. We can suggest it, or you
Yeah.
can suggest it as the council, but you cannot force them to do anything, right? Since it's their list. I
Mhm.
think the way to couch it would be, I mean, there, with respect to the part one, part two, and the notice, I mean,
It's easier for them
somebody
if
wherever.
it's clear in one place or the other. I mean, if the idea is the list is to be
Well,
functional.
not just that, and if they're putting stuff into part one that doesn't belong there, then it's not getting the appropriate public notice, right?
Mhm.
Of the exemption. And so that's what we would want to caution them against.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is again explaining the purpose like of the part one is really the super manini stuff. Okay, so interior renovations to existing buildings can probably go in there. Really maintenance stuff, if you're switching out a electric box, yeah, that's fine. That seems appropriate for part one. But again, like on I'm using the erosion control stuff because I'm looking at it, right? Like knowing what goes into that, and some may be really minor structures, but we just don't know there's no size limitations here, right? If it's a whole hillside, I mean, that's probably something that's more appropriate for a part two, or maybe even an EA, depending on the nature of it, right? So that's kind of what we gotta I think explain to them, and going through this list is, if they're just putting categories of things, it's not clear that how are they going to make the decision themselves? How do you determine what's de minimis and not? Just because
Oh.
a type of action is listed as de minimis doesn't, depending on the scope of it, doesn't mean that it actually is.
Right.
And so that's more the guidelines we can give them in terms of, this is why we think this is appropriate or not appropriate as a part one. We think your list would be better if it's in part two, and it's more defensible for them, right? If there's some thought going into the
Sure.
list, if there's some limitations.
Sure. Michelle, can you send that 2006 list that you're?
It's on the main ERP website. It's
It
on
is.
our,
Okay, I'll take a look.
yep. If you go to actually the EAC page,
Yeah.
then agency exemption lists. Click on that and then just search for education.
Okay.
I'll drop a link in the chat in just a
I
second.
see it. I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Dawn, if they want to just ignore us and say, no, we like our list the way it is, I mean, that's up to them. And then, exemption committee can decide whether or not it's appropriate to elevate the list to full council for concurrence. I mean, I think if the council really disagreed with the way that a list is written, it doesn't have to give its concurrence, and the agency doesn't need it. To
Then
use
the next step then would be they would submit to ERP. Here's our list. Doesn't have the EAC stamp on the top, and ERP would publish it right on this list of agency exemption list.
Yes, I believe that's correct, right, Tom?
Yeah, I suspect we would publish it and somehow it would be designated as non-concurred.
Yeah, it just wouldn't have a concurred stamp on it. Because for their purposes, right, the reason they're doing part one and part two is just so they don't have to do the exemptions notice, the list of exemptions made to ERP, right? Because only the part two stuff that you have to submit. So I think under the rules, they'll take advantage of that, part one, part two, but it just would not be a concurred list. Should the council decide, hey, an agency want to not get concurrence.
Yeah, I don't see any kind of legal difference whether it's concurred or not. It seems to make sense that it should be, but I don't think legally there's any.
It's only recommended in the rules, not required.
Yeah, I think just for them, right? Again, the benefit of the concurrence is the vetting through the public and the council. conceivably a member of the public could challenge, and if they mistakenly do a part one versus part two, and really again the part two helps the agencies, right? Because the statute of limitations for a challenge to an exemption, that if the challenge is that the exemption was improper, you have 120 days to bring that challenge from the time that the public is notified, or from the time the public otherwise becomes aware of it if there was no publication, right? So, I mean, they could do something and 6 years later, somebody says, hey, you guys, I didn't know you did this. That was improper. You should have done an EA or an EIS. And if the exemption itself was never published, the 120 days starts from when that person found out, even if it's 6 years, 10 years down the road. So the benefit, that's why we redid the rules in this way, was to make, say, hey, if you're publishing your exemptions, you're starting that 120-day clock, rather than it kind of happening, down the road. But if they're not publishing, then the 120 days from the time the public finds out still applies.
Mhm.
Right.
So that's kind of the benefit, and not so yeah, Michelle, I don't know what you want to do on this meeting. I think it's going to take us longer than this meeting to go through the full list. I don't know if you want to maybe move to other, sorry, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just a member of the public.
Right. Yeah, I think since we haven't gotten through the list, I think it's probably better, since we're all like kind of synced up on what we're looking for now. Dawn can definitely use your help too, going through the list, and I can start with an email since they didn't join today's call, or if they do join the 1 o'clock call, we can give general guidance to them if we don't think it's useful to spend the time to go through, or that helpful, to go through item by item. But again, just encouraging them to sort of run through that filter of, if it's not really small, it's not internal, it's not, a replacement of something that's existing, really, through that lens, thinking of what belongs in part one and what belongs in part two. So, that can just be an email, maybe we, I give that general direction. If they're like, whoa, well, we really like to talk it out because, we don't know.
Maybe we should send the email before the 1 o'clock meeting, so they have a little heads up in case they show up on 1 o'clock and then we're saying it all over to them,
Sure.
Yeah.
I can do that.
I think that makes sense, because I think it would be better to go through the list with the exemption committee before you take it to council.
Yeah.
At this point, and especially today's kind of a transition meeting. I don't think we have enough time. I mean, we need an hour at least. I think with the agency to kind of go through this list, like a full hour. And it might be beneficial, I think, for exemption committee to kind of go through it line by line on before the next meeting too, right? Now that we realize it's a much different list, so
I think, maybe my email is just asking them, no need to attend this week, but we can follow up with an email. We don't have to wait to another meeting, maybe, to discuss it with them. But Dawn, you and I can exchange, can go through the list in more detail. We can come up with a detailed list of suggestions, general suggestions, and then detailed suggestions. And then we can meet next month.
Maybe ask them for the Word copy. I don't know if it's easier to do track changes for you if you want to do handwritten for them. But
in a red line of what changed, or maybe it all changed, but maybe a little explanation of
hey, we noticed this is very different. Can you give us some explanation? And I guess we weren't expecting essentially a new list where there was kind of specific feedback on the last list, and ask them if they can just give us an explanation of what they changed and why.
I think that's a good, whoever is doing the list should be able to underline quickly what's changed, and then it's easier for us to actually provide guidance at that point about if it should be category 1 or category 2. Who knows, maybe they have a super school coming up, somewhere like at what is it, the stadium or something, who knows, you know what I mean? like a college. So,
Or Maui High School.
yeah. Actually, the Kihei High School is really nice, but it's in the middle of nowhere. And then, the whole thing about the roundabout, right? So it was kind of like, here you have this beautiful school on a roundabout, but then the kids didn't have any real way to like walk safely to the school. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion, not like the environmental council opinion.
I can tell we met today to discuss the list, but since it's changed substantially from the last version, can DOE provide a track changes version of the list? Committee can use that version to provide more detailed comments. Provide more detailed comments prior to meeting with DOE next month.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, yeah, basically no need to attend at one.
Because say
Yeah.
Exemption committee, needs more time to review since there's some significant changes made. And then Tom, and I guess this might be a question for Allison if she's on full council meeting, but if it's only 2 exemption committee members going forward, I mean, does the meeting need to be agendized? I think no, right?
I think no, doesn't need to.
Yeah.
May want
I mean,
to.
I think it's still good practice, but if like Michelle and Dawn, for some reason you wanted to do a really quick meeting to talk about stuff with DOE, right, in between a regularly scheduled meeting, that you have a little bit more flexibility with only 2 members.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it'd be good practice to still do a normal agenda,
Okay.
especially if it's for something you're taking, if you're going to take action on it, for example, to vote to elevate it to full council or for public comment, that should be agendized. But if it's just hey, let's meet and discuss kind of meeting, then you need a little bit more flexibility with 2 members.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before you get completely off of this, if that's where it's about to go, I have a general question. Speaking of part 1s and part 2s, this notion of including part 3s on lists, I'm just kind of wondering how you guys feel about that. I see they did some effort here, and the other list that I'm aware that has a part 3, I'm not familiar with the ins and outs, but the DOT list, I think recently. And then another agency is inquiring about preparing an updated list, and they wanted to follow, they liked the notion of how what they saw in the DOT list of a part 3. So it seems like it's becoming more of a thing to have this emergencies, part 3 dealing with emergency actions included on the list. I just want to, is that a thing that you want to like to see more of, or have an idea of what it should be looking like? So at least when they ask me for some guidance, I have something to tell them.
What list should I be looking at that has that you just mentioned, so I can take a look for it?
This
one
on page 2.
Oh, page 2. Okay. I'm at like page 23.
Right. And it seems like the only reference to it
is on page 2.
Yeah.
Is on page 2. There is no part 3 that's actually discussed. So that's kind of makes me wonder what's the point, other than to say there is a notion of when there's an emergency, some different aspects apply.
Is there a AG opinion, Tom?
No.
No. Do you want to ask, should we ask our AG on the full meeting? I would like to have her address it, because it's HIR. I mean, it's a law, right? So I want to see what her answer is in terms of legality. I mean, no, you can say it too. But I think personally that there's going to be a lot more of these in Maui, just because of the issues that are occurring, and so and I think it should be we should have a good idea of potentially a scenario so that Tom can also give feedback.
Right, I mean, looking at this, what it appears to me is they essentially just put into their exemption list kind of verbatim what the rules speak about the emergency actions. And so I guess it's not a bad idea that their exemption list, which they use for guidance, provides some guidance on emergency actions. They're not coming up with anything other than just what the rules said, and they're not really interpreting it to apply to the different classes of action. They're just saying,
Well, this
what
is a
they say
DOE.
in 1, 2, 3.
This is a DOE list, right? And so when
This
I'm
is
looking
the
at it,
DOE's list, but they're,
yeah,
to me, it
but when
looks like they're just repeating in their list some verbiage from the rules.
right. But I'm thinking that it's related to King Cam 3 because King Cam 3 school might not be replaced in the same location. And so the governor did declare a state of emergency. That's the only thing I can think of where this might apply. Because King Cam 3 is now over significant distance from where it used to be. And so I think if I were to think in the future, there'd be some challenge to, locating a school where it might have been to somewhere else based on an emergency proclamation. So that's the only thing I can think of. But I don't know, I'd really ask our AG at that point.
Yeah, well, that discussion actually applies to many structures that are being built. And while
Yeah.
Chapter 343 is waived due to the emergency, and what's
Yeah.
going to happen down the road when there's no longer an emergency,
Right,
they're not in compliance,
right.
various things that, so that issue is there's total awareness of that and it's being considered, but life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
And you won't know until it's an emergency, right? So,
my feel is I don't see the point in doing a part 3 because everything's exempt during an emergency. So
Right.
it doesn't matter what they need to do. If it's to address the emergency, they can do it within the specified time period. But this, I think it raises the separate issue, and I know Mary Alice has brought it up at past meetings, in terms of doing for example, with Lahaina, kind of I forget what she called it, if it was like an after action assessment or whatnot, right? Just to document what actions were taken. And so if this is something the council or OPSD and ERP want to take on for future rulemaking in terms of because we know that many members of the public do have an issue with the basically the stay of Chapter 343 and other laws in the case of an emergency, and not having any type of environmental assessment. Do we provide a process whereby we require the agency to document what actions they took, et cetera, during that time period? So it obviously wouldn't be like an EA or an EIS pre-action, right? But having some kind of a record of what did they do so that you can, I don't know, incorporate that into future analyses, right? So I think that's separate and apart from this emergency action. So I'm hesitant to allow, I guess, agencies to have a part 3, one where the rules don't really allow for that. Again, 343 is suspended during emergencies anyways under statute and rules. And I don't know, I guess I'm hesitant to have agencies think that, because for example, so when the road got washed out in Kauai, right, when major repairs had to be done, that was exempted. But that type of work probably wouldn't qualify for a normal exemption, but for the fact that it had to be done during an emergency. So if they're going to start identifying those types of, actions on an exemption list, under the emergency section, I would be hesitant and to get it in people's minds that, hey, this is something that's generally exempt, where it's usually not. It's only because it happened to need to be done to address an emergency. So that's just kind of my thinking on that. And I know for when DOT, I think it was DOT, we're just like, whatever, it's their list if they want to do it. But we don't think, I think we told them, we don't think it's necessary. Like, you're covered under existing statute and rules for emergencies. You don't have to identify specific items.
Tom,
Well,
what
then
other
the council may want to consistently do that. Just tell them it's not necessary if that's how you believe.
And I think we have, and that's the first agency that brought that up, you know,
Right, and
so.
now it's been repeated here and maybe coming in on a Department of Defense one also, so it just may come onto the plate more to be, I just want to kind of give a advance notice that it seems to be happening more.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's going to be the policy of the council, then the council needs to actually discuss that and like vote on it, right? I don't think that's, so whoever the future chair is can put that on the agenda for next time to discuss that with the council.
Yeah, but we can
And
ask the AG for
AG
her
first.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tom. Can you disclose which DOD? Did you say DOD was one or DOT?
Yeah, DOD, State
Yeah.
Department of Defense called up and I guess what brought it to their attention is how they include the Emergency Management Agency. So emergency stuff is in their kuleana. And I guess that's why they just saw some affinity to including emergency actions in their list. To me, I said, I'm not sure if that's really the right way to be looking at it, but it was just some vague talk as opposed to I wasn't looking at anything. And I said, well, eventually you'll be submitting it to the EAC and they will respond with their thoughts on it. So just kind of giving you guys.
I would like to, yeah, I like to know DOT's thoughts and Department of Education's thoughts on this, you know, like what's prompting them to do this, to put it so specifically in their exemption list.
Or do they feel something's not covered by, you know, the statute or the rules?
Maybe they did find something like funding is an issue or something's an issue somewhere.
Yeah,
I expect Maui County to come up with this actually.
Yeah, and I think we got to make sure the agencies are clear. I mean, I know they cite the rule, but again, I'm hesitant to have this on their list because people are going to say, oh, look, this is an emergency. We got to do it so we can do it. What they consider an emergency and, you know, what the rule and the statute requires, it has to be a governor declared emergency, right? So that just needs to be emphasized that it's not just because, okay, your water hydrant got knocked over and it's an emergency to turn the water off, right? I mean, so I think that just needs to be clarified with the agencies and what their intent is by it.
I did not check the DOT list before, but maybe you recall, is it similar to this where they merely repeat some verbiage from the rules, or did they actually go into the different classes of action and say which is a part 1, which is a part 2, and which is a part 3 of each of the types, which would be, to me, very strange.
They do under the different parts. They do. I just did a quick control find for emergency while we were talking, Tom, because I was curious when you said that. And under part 1, type 1, TT in the DOE list, they list upon determination of the superintendent that an emergency exists, emergency mitigation and restoration work to prevent damage. So that's not listed under the part 3. It's listed under a part 1, type 1, but there's an emergency type exemption.
So there's something more you can ask them to clarify and kind of reorganize.
Did we concur with that list?
With which list?
Department of Transportation. Oh, sorry, this is DOE.
Yeah, DOE.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they have it one more time.
Michelle just talked about was this DOE list, but the DOT list, I believe, was concurred a year ago or something. I'm not looking it up as I speak.
You can look on the website to see if it's
It's 2022.
And I didn't mean to derail your discussion of other important things.
No, I'm really glad you did, Tom. That helps us, yeah, for when we go discuss. DOT was concurred and published in 2022. It was reviewed and concurred upon, and it had part 3.
Yeah, but I don't know if they actually added a part 3. I think they just had that same language up front
I see.
as I'm looking at it.
Do a control find for emergency.
And so, and I think that's why we were okay with it, was because we're just, I'm pretty sure we told them we don't think that's necessary, but it was just repeating the existing rule.
So this one's a little bit different since under the part 1 type 1, and then again under part 1 type 4, they have superintendent declared emergency.
Yeah, and I don't think they can do that. But they have that under part 1 and not a part 3, which they're saying is part 3.
Well, I think they're calling it different things. There's emergency actions as defined, right? On page 2, and then now they're defining new kinds of emergency actions under part 1, type 1, and type 4. They're like differently. To your point of, only a governor can declare an emergency, they're identifying other types of emergencies within
although the rules do bring up the notion, which is reiterated here in the 3rd paragraph, for emergencies where there has not been a governor declared emergency, what shall happen? That's what paragraph 3 of the 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. And if unexpected emergency causing or likely to cause loss or damage to life, health, property, or essential public service, but for which a declaration of a state of emergency has not been made, proposal agency undertaking an emergency action shall document it in its records at the emergency action on its list of exemption notices for publication, right? So it wouldn't need to be specifically listed.
Oh yeah, it does. No, it does say it shall include the emergency action on its list of exemption notices for publication.
Right. List of notices,
right, supposed to notify us, and yet it gets published. So again, that's just what the rules say. It's what they're supposed to do, and they're kind of just putting it here, so it's guidance, I guess, when something happens. They may look to here before they look to their rules, so it may not hurt for it to be here. Doesn't seem like they're merely stating it here, is not interpreting it how it should apply to different things. But so, if that's all they're doing, maybe it's not a problem. If they start trying to interpret it now and applying it to different types of actions, that could get wonky.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess in that case, I mean, I still think in that, well, it'll be hard for them to identify on their list every single type of emergency action, right?
Yeah, that's why even try to do that.
I think that limits them too much, but they just got to know if they're interpreting something as an emergency, they have to do what's in, section 17C for documentation purposes.
Okay, well, we will flag that. Thank you for bringing it up, Tom. I think we've only got about 12 minutes left, so maybe we should march through the next couple of items just to tick them off. Finalizing the revisions to the exemption guidance. Where does that currently stand now? I know Onauna and Tom, you're both working on revisions. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I haven't had much of a chance to do anything over this past month. It's just been many other things, including giving a lot of guidance to agencies on the exemption process. So having guidance, published guidance would be helpful. Well, there's
Mhm.
certainly, and yes, I do give guidance on preparing their lists, but more of it is procedural stuff of how to go about properly filling out an exemption notice and then getting these lists to us and when exemptions are appropriate, all of that stuff, which I think may, as I took a quick look at the exemption guidance before this meeting, it may need to be enhanced. Just with every time I talk to an agency, which is pretty often, there's kind of more focus or scope to the whole notion of exemption, what exemption guidance could be, as opposed to what's in this printed out piece of paper. But I keep meaning to get back and, finishing this exemption guidance, and it will happen soon, along with a bunch of other things, I promise.
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, although I just noticed there's one typo now on page 1, there's another advisory reference that needs to be added under background environmental advisory council. But at least I think I've made my edits to this. And so Tom, I'll leave it in your capable hands. The exhibits do need to be updated with the publication schedules and whatnot, based on what we talk. So yeah, I think if you can, and I know you got a lot of other stuff going on, identify the new topics that have been raised in your discussions with the agencies. And then if you can start drafting some stuff, and then maybe it comes back to exemption committee for discussion from that point, and specific verbiage that might be helpful in providing guidance to the agencies. Okay.
Yes, sure, and informing the whole group about what's going on. So yes, we can keep doing further iterations of the guidance and hope to actually get it completed soon.
Great. Okay, so Nana, you'll send what you have to Tom, or you have already?
I think I already sent you the last version that we worked on. Yeah,
we have that already.
Oh, okay. So we'll just keep it on the agenda for the next meeting, so we can just keep chatting about it and figure out how to make it better.
That typo you talked about, Onana, has been found and I corrected. So.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I think you even pointed it out before.
The last time. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was like, as I'm looking at this first page, I know we've gone through this many of times already. So
yes,
but
so
yeah.
hard to make sure you're looking at the most recent version.
Okay.
All right. Okay, next item, last item on the agenda was to review and approve the September 2024 meeting minutes. Did you guys get a chance to review that, or do you want 2 minutes to do it now? It's pretty short.
Yeah, I'll move to. Oh, I can't. Never mind.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have to do it or you do it?
I wrote them. Can I move to approve my own notes?
I always like to not do it as chair.
Oh,
Yeah.
So what is the language? I move to approve the September 3rd, 2024 minutes. Is that the right language?
That's right.
Okay.
I second. And all in favor?
Aye.
All in favor?
Wow, this is really going to take some time getting used to, that's for sure.
Okay, well, that was everything we had for here. If we adjourn now, we have a few minutes to grab a bite to eat before the full council meeting. So meeting adjourned at 12:52 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.